it everywhere in nature. So just make it a bit bigger here. So, and there is a setting for this kind of pattern in Maya mesh that is still pretty unexplored. So these are all kind of occurrences in nature where we see this Fibonacci sequence happening in snail shells, in hurricanes, in weather patterns, in your flowers, and yeah, it's just amazing and so beautiful. And it all goes back to what is called the golden ratio. And if we start with a tiny little square here and add another one, we have 2 of these units. And when we take these 2 and make a square out of it, we have another square next to it. And then it goes on like that with 3, it goes on with 5. So we're always adding squares, and that creates this spiral. So there is a whole mathematical secret behind that. So basically it's the row of numbers, like here 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. This is called the Fibonacci sequence, named after an Italian man who made this sequence known. He wasn't the first to discover it. There was an Indian guy before in historical records. It's been found that people discovered that very early in history, but Fibonacci made it more known. And so it just works that you always add these numbers. So 0 and 1 is 1, and so it goes on. 1 and 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, and so it goes on and on. And here we get a sequence of numbers that are found in all these nature patterns. So there's a whole mathematical function behind that, and we end up like with a ratio that is called the phi number or phi number. So it's 1.618 so and so, not to be mixed up with the other number called pi or pi. That is more for circles, but this is the golden ratio, the phi number. And yeah, it can be used here for circles, for rectangles and triangles. So yeah, so it occurs everywhere. Some logos are designed according to this ratio. So if we make circles in all the squares that have been set up in this sequence and use the circles to create the logos are created in the golden ratio. So here the Apple logo, the Twitter logo. There's actually also, you can download Illustrator files that give you these templates for the Fibonacci circles that you can use if you want to create logos. That's quite helpful. Then the sunflower. This is the classical example for Fibonacci's sequences. And this is so interesting. The pattern looks beautiful, but then there's also, you can count these spirals. They occur within these patterns, and if you count them, they also count in 1, 2, 3, and so on. and in the other direction. So they always end up with the same numbers according to the Fibonacci sequence. So we see it often in floral plants, in succulents here, all kind of different shapes, very beautiful, in snail shells. Even in waves, you can find it. In music, so there is also harmony when you use the Fibonacci sequence numbers for creating chords. This is a galaxy. In vegetables like Romanesco. There's a hurricane built such a formation. Daisies, they are very similar to the sunflowers and other flowers. Dahlia, camellia. Oh, and this is interesting that even the reproduction of animals happen according to that sequence. So these are tiny little rabbits here, and they reproduce also according to the Fibonacci sequence. And we can find it in architecture and in the human body. For example, ear shapes and face shapes, fingerprints, fingers. Of course, there are variations. It's never exactly the same. It's just you can find a pattern, and there's always a buffer, otherwise we would all look the same. But it's just fascinating to see that it reoccurs so often in nature, and even our DNA has this number of the Fibonacci sequence, this golden ratio. And believe it or not, Africa is designed in the golden ratio. And this is the whole continent can be put in such a Fibonacci spiral. Oh yeah, so that's my personal artwork. That's why I'm doing, or why I've chosen this topic, is because I was looking for reference materials. I was running, and I saw these tiny little daisies. They are just 1 centimeter long, big, and it was so hard to paint these. So I was looking for references. And especially when I went on a bigger canvas, so this is all done in oil, and I wanted such a pattern, but it was pretty hard to do it just by measuring it with my eyes. So the big solution for me was later when I discovered it in Maya mesh, because I can also then do leaves, and plants also reproduce according to the Fibonacci sequence. So this is actually great that there is now such a setting in the world node that we can use it for modeling. So I want to play a video now that shows some of these examples and how I did it. So this video is about 10 minutes long. sorry, that's the Maya. Here we go. Yeah, and I hope you can get some inspiration for your own work out of that. I made it a bit slower that you can also see the settings. I didn't comment every step I do. It's more an intermediate level, but you can email me if you have any questions. So I'm going to play that now. So this is 10 minutes long, and then we see. I have other examples in Maya to show, and then we can also do a Q&A session.
Your PDF is still showing, Elke.
Oh. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. This is the reference picture of a daisy that I want to use, mapped on a polygon plane. And I created a polygon cylinder that looks like a hexagon from the top, just to match these tiny small disc flowers in the center. And I want to use this object now as a base object for the mesh network. So I go to the animation menu and create a mesh network with this cylinder selected. So it gives me a row of objects, and I can edit this in the mesh editor. I click on the distribute node and reduce the number of points to 1. And then I create a world node and change the cluster mode to Fibonacci spiral. There's also a sphere, but for this disk shape we need a spiral. And I increase the points per cluster to 1000. That's just a number that I thought that works for what I want. And here, this is like exactly this Fibonacci pattern. When we look inside of the original, there's also a scaling happening. So for that I need a strength map. So I created a strength node, and this gives me a ramp. So I just tried, and it's fun to play around. You can do nice motion graphics also with that, just animating these position numbers. So I was just playing around a bit until I found some settings and created a ramp. And made a preset here. So that comes pretty close to what I want. So here are the settings. If you want to copy it, you can just look it up here for the different color swatches. So here I mapped just some UVs from the top and made a ramp with some yellowish colors and some little bits and pieces to make it look more random, and then just such a shape as a base and some petals. I just used a duplicate spatial to rotate the petals around. The leaves of this pink cushion are also growing according to the Fibonacci sequence. I created a leaf shape from a polygon cube and point snapped the pivot to its bottom and then grid snapped it to the center so it will rotate around the y-axis at this pivot point. And then I froze the transformations to have zeroed numbers in the channel box, and I create a mesh network and open the mesh editor. I reduce the number of points in the distribute editor to 1 and make a world node. And I put it again to the Fibonacci spiral. I set the previous points mode to kill so I don't see the first one. And I increase the points per cluster numbers to get more leaves. Now I have to make them grow upwards somehow, and I'm going to use a Python node for that. So I create a Python node in the mesh editor. That Python node contains the script that generates that Fibonacci algorithm. I also have a stem hidden in my scene that I unhide now, so it looks a bit more like a plant. You don't need to know anything about Python. You just make a tiny change in the attribute editor where the script is. There is this y position defined by this I equals I, and then we just add a multiplier and type in times 3. That makes it move 3 times higher than it was before, or if we used a negative number, it would do it downwards. Or if I just use a number like 0.5 or 0.8, it moves the leaves closer together. I go to the world node and increase the points per clusters just to let some more leaves grow. When I googled, I found a free download for a Fibonacci script, a ML script. I downloaded it, and when you copy and paste that into the script editor, it creates a spiral in the scene that is as long as the frame numbers in the timeline. So if you increase it, it just goes endless. So this is the accurate Fibonacci spiral. So it's just a curve, and with that curve we can do all kind of things now. So I'm going to make a snail with that one, and later we can just play around a bit in mesh and use the curve node in mesh. I scale the whole spiral so it's 0 in X, and I use it as an extrusion path. I selected an edit point here and detach the curve because the Fibonacci curve goes on forever. I go in vertex mode to check where the beginning of this curve is. It's indicated by a square, so the first vertex is a square and the second is a U, so this indicates the direction. I need to turn this around because I want to extrude from the other side. So I go to curve reverse direction, and when I go now in vertex mode, the square and the U is on the other end. So I create a circle and curve snap it to the curve. I delete the history. It's always good to freeze an object before we use it for something. So I select the curve and go to surfaces, extrude with these settings. So it's a tube at the path, in component, pivot, and orientation is the path direction. And with that I get already a nice result. I can tune it now in the inputs node, scale it, or I can select the circle and it still has all the history, so I can play around with these settings and to scale it. I leave it like that. You could also still edit the vertices along the golden spiral. I leave it now like that. And now we need to convert this into polygons. So I go to modify, convert NURBS to polygons, and I use quads and go in general in the tessellation method. A number in U is 50 and I take 20 for V, and that gives me quite a good result that I can now smooth just pressing 3, so it looks almost the same. Yes, so I'm just trying to get my face on here again. Now let's go into Maya directly. Can you see the screen now?
I can.
So yeah, great. So now, while I was playing around with this Daisy disc, I noticed that actually I need to know much more about how can I manipulate and get other shapes, because many plants have a cone shape like this. And in order to get into these things, you can also just play around on the strength map. So this map is just this ramp here, and it's just so nice to play around with these things. And of course you can animate all these position numbers here and set keyframes and use other objects for that. You can, for example, make let's just see this one. And that's the same. Yeah, so kind of a strawberry-like heart-shaped one. And of course in Mesh you can also just replace your objects with other objects and use multiple objects using an ID node. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and that it inspired you a bit to play around and yeah, try with these settings and yeah, different nodes, your own little creations.